Chapter 9 of Handy Mandy and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. The Magic Hammer. There was no answer to Handy's loud knocks, and pausing to catch her breath and blow on her fingers, the Goat Girl wondered what to try next. Then, in spite of Nox's warning bellow, she began to shove and push the wet planks with her shoulder. But that did no good either, so she felt in her pocket for something to use as a wedge. Almost at once her fingers closed on the silver hammer they had plowed up in Carrotaria. While the hammer would not do for a wedge, it would at least save her knuckles. So lifting it high above her head, Handy Mandy brought it down with a resounding whack. A shower of silver sparks followed the hammer blow, and Nox, peering through the waterfall, saw a gnarled and crooked elf with a purple beard dancing madly round the startled girl. "I am the elf of the hammer who must do whatever you ask me to," sang the elf between his high leaps and prances. "Then open this door," directed Handy, spinning round in a circle herself to get a good look at the little fellow. "My eye, how funny Oz is! Magic horns, topsies, hooked noses, and now you! Don't tell me a little body like you can really open this great heavy door." "Pick up the hammer and doubt no more. Himself the elf will now open the door." In a daze, Handy Mandy picked up the hammer and put it back in her pocket, and Nox, thunderstruck by the whole proceeding, thrust his head through the waterfall just in time to see the knobby little gnome push the door open with one thump of his brown fist. Quick as a flash, Handy was on the other side. "Come on, come on!" she called hoarsely to Nox. "Can't you see it's closing? Oh, mercy, Ursie! Do you want to leave me here all alone?" "Yes!" snorted Nox in an exasperated voice, but jumping as he snorted. "I'd like nothing better." As he came to better, he landed on the other side of the waterfall and skidded through the open door into the mountain. He had just time to tuck in his tail when the door, with an ominous creak, slammed shut. "Now see what you've done!" gasped Nox, eyeing the gloomy interior with distaste and foreboding. "I thought you were going to be a help to me, and all you you do is get me into trouble. What sort of place is this anyway?" "A cave," quavered Handy, wrapping all her arms tightly round herself. "My eye, it's so high, I can hardly see the top. Where's that elf?" "Gone," sighed the Ox, taking a cautious step forward. "But I expect he'll come back at the first tap of that hammer. All very puzzling if you ask me." "Well, shall I call him back?" asked Handy uneasily. "It's kind of lonely in here, and maybe himself could tell us where we are." "Better wait till we need him," advised the Ox. "After all, we know we are in a cave, seems to be of silver rock, too. Just cast your eyes at those stalactites, m'lass." "So that's what you call 'em." The Goat Girl glanced curiously up at the silver icicles hanging in jagged points from the ceiling. "We have caves on Mount Mern, but nothing like this." She looked apprehensively round the silent cavern, from which a perfect honeycomb of passageways branched off in all directions. "A fine place to get lost, I'd call it," she shivered, moving as close as she could to her companion. "What makes this lavender light? I see no lamps." "Jewels," confided the Ox in a hushed voice. "See? There are hundreds of amethysts embedded in those rocks, each glowing like—" "An eye," finished Handy nervously. "And all watching us, I dare say. My eye, do you suppose anyone lives here? But they must." Unwinding her arms, Handy suddenly began snapping all 35 of her fingers. Nox! Nox! She cried excitedly. I've just thought of something. Can't you think without shouting? Asked Nox, flashing his eyes suspiciously from left to right. No, said Handy triumphantly, for this is something to shout about. Look, old Toggins, if this is a silver cave, why wouldn't a silver mountain be on top? All we have to do is open that door and start climbing again. As I remember, there was a sheer precipice back of the waterfall. How could we climb that? No, no. The best thing for us to do is to travel down one of these passageways and hope it will bring us out on the side of the mountain itself. Yes, but which one? Demanded the Goat Girl. There are about 100, it seems to me. Let's try that first one to the right, proposed the Ox judiciously. Their voices echoed and reverberated back and forth so uncannily in the big hollow cavern that almost without realizing it they began to talk in whispers and tread as softly as thieves in the night. Halfway to their destination they stopped, rigid with horror and consternation. Thumping footsteps were coming toward them from the labyrinth on the left. Someone does live here after all, said the Goat Girl. Someone who weighs a ton. Hark to that. Watch yourself, warned Nox, planting all 4 feet and making ready to charge if the cave dweller proved unfriendly. Oh, my aunt! A giant! With a shrill scream, Handy flung all her arms round Nox's neck and buried her face in his shoulder. Poor Nox, nearly strangled by the Goat Girl's embrace, could neither move nor speak, and could scarcely breathe. With rolling eyes and quaking legs, he watched the monster approach. The giant's body, almost 10 times the size of a grizzly bear, was encased in a tight purple uniform with bells instead of buttons that jingled whenever he moved. He wore a huge silver helmet, and his neck, almost a foot long, kept darting up and down as he shot his head in this direction and that. "Oh, there you are!" he roared suddenly, catching sight of the 2 travelers trembling together in the center of the cavern. "How dare you enter the cave of the King of the Silver Mountain without invitation or permission?" "Then this really is the Silver Mountain?" marveled Handy, twisting her apron nervously in her wooden fingers. "Of course!" yelled the giant, thumping the floor with an enormous silver club. "And I, Snorpus the Mighty, am keeper of the hidden door. I am outkeeper for this whole mountain," he boasted truculently, expanding his chest and looking complacently down at the 2 midgets at his feet. But something in his manner began to reassure the Goat Girl. "I'll bet he's dumb as he's big," she confided hurriedly to Nox. Then raising her voice and all of her arms, she called up loudly, "Then you must indeed be strong and sturdy." "Oh, I am!" bawled the giant, twirling his silver mustache and fixing Handy for a moment with his glittering eye. "Snorpus the doorkeeper is strong as an ox." There was something very peculiar about the eye of the giant. It seemed to revolve on a moving belt, peering out as it passed through the 4 wide open lids set at intervals round the top of his head, so that half the time he was looking the other way. "Did you ever see an ox?" inquired Handy politely, as the eye of Snorpus again flashed by. "No, but I'd like to," admitted the giant, shooting his head out to the side. "Well, this is an ox," cried Handy, tapping the anxious beast at her side with a rubber hand. "And if you are strong as an ox, you are strong as Nox, and nothing much can stop you." "How strong is he?" asked Snorpus, lowering himself stiffly to one knee, in order to get a look at what he at first supposed to be a small and insignificant animal. So strong, explained the Goat Girl impressively, as she pointed with all hands to the side of the cave, that if he so much as bumped into that wall yonder, the whole cavern would collapse like a pack of cards. "Oh, then I hope he'll be very careful," faltered Snorpus, taking out a huge silk handkerchief to mop his forehead. "It would annoy the king frightfully if you destroyed his cavern, and I might even lose my head and position here." "Oh, he'll be careful," promised Handy Mandy generously. "He being an ox and you being strong as an ox makes us all friends, doesn't it?" "I suppose so," muttered Snorpus, tapping his knee uncertainly with his club. "But just the same, I am still the outkeeper and must do my duty at all hazards. At all hazards!" he shouted, standing up to give himself courage and puffing out his cheeks like a porpoise. "But you have done your duty," bellowed Nox in a voice even louder than the doorkeeper's. "If we were outside the mountain, it would be your plain duty to keep us there. But since we are already inside, you have nothing more to do with us. Isn't that so?" Lowering his head, Nox made a little lunge at the giant's shins, and backing away, Snorpus gave the pair several long, puzzled looks. "Well, then," he decided finally, "if I have nothing more to do with you, you had best come along to the king." "That is exactly what we wish to do," answered the Goat Girl promptly. "My, you are brave, aren't you?" The giant's eye flashed for a moment in real admiration upon Handy Mandy. Then picking up his club, he began clumping away to the left. "Now I wonder what he meant by that," puffed Nox, for they both had to run to even keep the giant in sight. "I don't know," gasped Handy, "but never mind what he means. We still have your golden horn and the silver hammer and we'll manage somehow. But imagine getting right inside the Silver Mountain and never knowing it." "Yes, and we may go out the same way," predicted the Royal Ox gloomily, following the giant down the wide, glittering corridor. "I never did like these tunnely places or people." End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Handy Mandy and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10. The King of the Silver Mountain. "I hear water," worried Handy as Snorpus suddenly vanished around a bend in the corridor. "Oh dear ear, I do hope we won't have to go swimming again." "Then mind your manners," warned the Royal Ox, giving his horns a little shake. "Remember, it is safer to keep on the right side of kings and giants, and if we are to learn anything about Kerry, we must be extremely patient and polite." A loud gasp interrupted Nox's speech, for Handy Mandy, well in the lead, had also stepped round the bend. Hastening to catch up with her, the Ox, too, gave an involuntary exclamation of wonder and astonishment. The silver corridor had brought them into a second cavern, smaller than the entrance cave, but so light and lacy, so bright and beautiful, for once Handy Mandy stood perfectly speechless. The silver sides of the dome-shaped grotto had been carved to show all the historical figures and characters of ancient Oz. Wizards, giants, knights, witches, huntsmen, robbers, kings, queens, and their patient subjects marched in a splendid procession round the walls. Sparkling lavender sand covered the floor, and a lake of shimmering quicksilver took up the entire center, lapping the shore with its swift, soundless waves. On a small island of purest amethyst in the middle of this lake, the King of Silver Mountain reclined at ease. His back was toward the newcomers, and he seemed lost in some deep and entirely satisfactory contemplation. "A king, if ever I saw one," breathed Nox moistly in Handy's ear. With a wordless nod, the Goat Girl agreed, for in this long, indolent, yet majestic figure, Handy felt she was seeing royalty for the first time. The unusual height of the Silver Monarch was at once apparent, and his tight-fitting suit of deepest purple, without ornament save for his jeweled belt and sword, set off his handsome figure to the best advantage. His hair, of an astonishing thickness, was as silver as his cavern. When he turned his head, as he presently did at a little cough from Snorpus, Handy saw that his eyes were of a clear and piercing violet. Quietly and without hurry, the Silver King rose and, picking up his filigreed crown, set it firmly on his head. Then, retrieving a long-stemmed pipe from a crevice in the rock, he established himself in a seat carved from the amethyst and looked inquiringly across at his visitors. "So," he whistled, his eyes sparkling with lively interest as they rested for a long moment on the Goat Girl. "Two very, very clever travelers." "Why do you say that?" blurted out Handy, and was instantly overcome at her own boldness in speaking to so grand a person. "The fact that you are here in this cavern proves you are clever," answered the King, leaning over to fill his pipe in the quicksilver lake. "You have opened the door in the mountain that does not open, past the impassable guardian and keeper of that door, Snorpus." The King's pleasant voice changed so quick and cruelly, Handy almost lost her balance. "What have you to say for yourself, you lazy boswoke?" roared his Majesty, his eyes flashing flinty sparks of purple. "I'll have you potted for this, potted and reduced to a smithering smith, do you hear?" Poor Snorpus, who could not have helped hearing the King's booming sentence, dropped to his knees and began pleading, explaining and blubbering all in the same breath. Even Nox, startled as he was, tried to put in a good word for him, but the muttering monarch, paying no attention to any of them, had lifted his silver pipe to his lips, and an enormous bubble was rising from the bowl. Handy, with chattering teeth, watched the bubble grow larger and larger, float off the pipe and hover over the unlucky head of the giant. As Snorpus tried in vain to dodge, the bubble broke with the sound of a doomsday bell, enveloping him in a cloudy mist. When it cleared away, the giant was indeed reduced, coming now scarcely to Handy's shoulder. "How about it? Shall we run?" whispered the Goat Girl as the King began to blow another bubble. "Boy, do I feel a draft." "But he's not mad at us," answered the Ox, ducking nervously as the second bubble soared over their heads. "Wait. Be patient. Remember the little King." As Nox finished speaking, the bubble sailed off and away down one of the silver corridors leading away from the royal cavern. Presently they heard a bell ringing in the distance as the bubble broke, and before you could say Pop Robinson, 70 silver-jacketed little bellboys came trotting into the cave. "Take this poor failure to Nifflepok and see that he is potted," directed the King sternly, setting down his bubble pipe. "Have Timano guard the mountain door and see that I am not disturbed. Important matters have come up this morning. Important matters." "Yes, yes, your Highness. It shall be done, your Excellency," mumbled the bellboys, pushing poor Snorpus ahead of them. "Watch yourselves! Watch yourselves!" warned the little giant as he was rudely hustled out of the royal presence. "Now," smiled the Silver King, positively beaming upon his visitors, "now we can proceed with our conversation. Sorry to trouble you with this small matter, but discipline, as the old army officers will tell you, discipline must be maintained." "Huh!" sniffed Handy Mandy under her breath, looking with dislike and disillusion at the royal figure on the rocks. The giant was right. You're a fellow who'll bear watching. Fortunately, her words did not carry, and lazily glancing at them through his long purple lashes, the Silver King continued his speech. "Since you have so easily entered my mountain," he observed blandly, "I assume you have some powerful magic treasure or appliance in your possession. Am I right?" At the sudden forward lurch of the Royal Ox and Handy Mandy's surprised expression, the King gave a satisfied little nod. "Fine, fine," he chuckled, rubbing his hands together briskly. "And now let us waste no more time. Who sent you? What have you to offer? As you doubtless know, the Wizard of Wutz pays well for magic treasures and formulas." "Wizard!" choked Handy Mandy carelessly, clapping her iron hand to her forehead and knocking herself over backward. "Wizard!" she repeated, dazedly picking herself up. "But I thought you were a king." "I am both," stated the owner of the cavern proudly. "I am King of the Silver Mountain and also the Wizard of Wutz, second in importance only to Glinda and the Wizard of Oz. And ha! It won't be long before I am the only wizard, the sole, supreme and only Wizard of Oz. Not long, not long." Again the Silver King rubbed his hands exultantly together. "I have my secret agents in every kingdom in this country, and even in the Emerald City of Oz," he told him impressively. "I already have the record book of Glinda, the Good Sorceress, and many more of the magic treasures of Oz, and soon I will have them all. All! My agents are clever and I have trained them well." "But I thought magic was against the law," cried Nox with an outraged snort. "I understood no one was allowed to practice magic but Ozma, Glinda, and the Wizard of Oz." "Then why are you here?" demanded Wutz sternly. "You have been practicing magic or you could not have entered this mountain. Come now, let us stop all this nonsense and get down to silver tacks and business. What have you to offer? Who sent you? 3, 6, 9, 5, or 11? As you can imagine, this was perfect jargon to Nox and the Goat Girl, but Handy Mandy, convinced by this time that the Silver King was both sly and dangerous, resolved to fall in with his little supposition and see what would come of it. "9 sent us," she answered boldly, while Nox looked across at her in perfect stupefaction. "You don't say! I rather thought you came from the Munchkin country," mused the Wizard. "Something in the way the ox talked, though you yourself are not a native Ozian." "No," Handy said noncommittally, and rather pleased that she had chosen 9, since this number had something to do with the Munchkins. "Did 9 say anything about the silver hammer?" asked the King, twinkling his eyes at the Goat Girl. "He told us nothing," stated Handy, quite truthfully this time. "That's 9 for you," fumed the King discontentedly. "He's the slowest and most unsatisfactory agent I have. 2 years searching for that hammer and no report yet. I've a good notion to kick him out and put little King Harry back on the throne. A bargain's a bargain and I've kept my part. Besides, I've got to have that hammer before I can make myself supreme ruler in Oz. Why, it's the second most important magic in the 4 kingdoms." At this surprising statement, Handy pricked up her ears. "What did you say about Kerry?" panted Nox, almost stepping into the Quicksilver Lake at mention of the little King. "Nothing. I was talking about 9, scowled the Wizard. "If that fellow does not show some action soon, I'll—" The King clenched his fists and looked so terribly angry that Handy was afraid he was going to blow bubbles again, but instead he glared across the lake and demanded impatiently, "Well, if you didn't bring the silver hammer, what did you bring?" "A magic flower!" exclaimed the Goat Girl hurriedly, and before Nox could give away the fact that they did have the silver hammer. She could guess from the expression in his eyes that he was about to offer the hammer in exchange for Kerry. "A flower?" bawled Wutz, his face turning from red to purple. "My caves are full of flowers. Frosted silver lilies, long-stemmed sterling roses, daisies and violets with jeweled centers. I can grow any kind of flower I wish. How dare you take up my time with a flower? Pah! Go back and tell Nine you had better look out. He's flirting with dismissal and destruction." "But this flower saves you from injury when you fall," stammered Handy, heartily wishing she had never gotten herself into such a controversy. "Fall?" sneered the Silver King, simply bounding off his throne. "I never fall," and had hardly finished speaking before he caught his toe on a jutting amethyst and pitched headlong to the rocks. Horrified, and without waiting for the irate monarch to regain his feet, Handy and Nox began to run toward one of the outgoing corridors, the Goat Girl colliding as she ran with a plump little dignitary in a jeweled robe and high hat. Your Highness," puffed the little fat man, stopping long enough to glare at Handy Mandy. "All our last efforts are to be crowned with success. Five has but this moment arrived with—" "With what?" demanded the King, springing lightly as a cat to his feet. "With a jug," exulted the little fat man, tossing his high hat into the air. "With a jug that was Rug and the magic picture of Queen Ozma herself." "Ah, splendid!" beamed the monarch, who could turn his smiles and rages on and off like electric lights. "That will be a lesson to those Emerald Cityites." Then, suddenly remembering Handy and Nox and his undignified fall, he shouted shrilly, "Stop those imposters! Stop them, Nifflepok! And lock them up in the prison pits till I have time to demolish them. Ha! We'll pot the Ox's tongue, make soup of his tail, saddles and boots of his hide, and use his head for a hat rack. As for that seven-armed monstrosity, she shall work in the polishing caves for the rest of her stupid life." "I'll polish your nose first," promised Handy, shaking all her fists at the King. "Better come quiet," warned Nifflepok, looking so worried Handy felt a little sorry for him. "Wutz'll blow bubbles if you make him too mad, and that'll be much worse than being locked up, you know." "Oh, let's go with a little high hat," groaned Nox, blinking his eyes at Handy to remind her they still had his horns and the silver hammer. "For my part, I'd like a little peace and quiet." "Take 'em away! Take 'em away!" ordered the King, stamping up and down his rocky island. "Send in five! Send in five at once!" "Come along, then," said Nifflepok, being careful to keep out of the way of Nox's horns. "Come, give me your hand, maiden. Not that one! Not that one!" he howled dismally as the Goat Girl clasped his outstretched fingers in her iron hand. "Let go! Let go!" "Let's go! Let's go!" chuckled Handy Mandy mischievously, and squealing with pain, the little minister hurried them down a long, dim passageway. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11 of Handy Mandy and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11. Down in the Prisoner's Pit. "Oh, oh, give me another hand and I'll do my best to help you," spluttered Nifflepok as Handy Mandy ruthlessly continued to squeeze his fingers. "We'll help ourselves, thank you," retorted the Goat Girl tartly. Then, relenting a little, she relaxed her hold, for she could not help pitying Nifflepok and all the subjects of this cruel king. "Where are these prison pits?" she asked impatiently, for she was anxious to be alone with Nox. If you are going to lock us up, do hurry along with it." "Yes, yes, absolutely, yes," moaned Nifflepok, glancing nervously over his shoulder to be sure the white ox was not going to tread on his heels. "You'll be there in no time, no time at all," he assured them earnestly. "Step over here, please." Moving a sliding door in the wall of the corridor, the King's assistant waved them toward a smooth, wheelless silver carriage. It looked to Handy a lot like an old-fashioned sleigh, and as there were seats in front and a space in back large enough for the ox, she let go Nifflepok's hand and quite willingly climbed aboard. Nox, grunting a little, stepped over the side and settled himself behind her. "Well, goodbye," sniffled Nifflepok, rubbing his bruised fingers tenderly. "You'll find everything you need below. Not that you'll be needing anything," he added mournfully as he pulled out a silver switch. "Goodbye. I'm sorry for you," he shouted as the car, with a lurch that almost loosened Handy's teeth, shot down a sliding runway to the deep pits of darkness below. Now, you and I, who are used to scenic railways and have enjoyed the thrills of shoot-the-chutes for years, would have been less startled by the wild, dizzy leaps, the swoops, curves, and climbs, and the sickening drops of the Silver King's chariot. But neither the Goat Girl nor the Royal Ox had ever heard of a scenic railway, much less ridden in one, and the underground car of the Silver Monarch was more like a shoot-the-chutes than anything else. Sometimes the two travelers were in complete darkness. At other times they whirled by the narrow, well-lighted ledges of a queer cave city, where the subjects of the Mountain King lived in cell-like apertures in the silver rock like the cliff dwellers of old. Then, without warning, the car would plunge to the work caverns below, past the gloomy shafts of the silver mines, or dart up to the living quarters and grottos of the King himself. Caves so lavishly furnished and glowing with jewels, Handy let out little shrieks of astonishment. In the King's subterranean gardens, silver swallows bathed in the silver fountains. Silver maples rustled their lacy branches in the lavender-scented breezes. Silver-petaled flowers with jeweled centers grew as riotously as daisies and buttercups in the upstairs world. The mountaineers themselves, working listlessly with pick and shovel in the mines, or walking soberly along the ledges beside their little cliff dwellings, seemed undersized and unhappy to the Goat Girl. Not that she caught more than a flying glimpse of them as the silver car tore by. In fact, she was so frantically busy holding on to the front rail of the car with all her various hands and catching her breath after each dizzy swoop that her mind was in a perfect whirl. The groans and snorts of Nox were far from reassuring, but afraid to look back lest she herself be flung out, Handy clung desperately to the rail, wondering when the wild ride would end and where under the mountain the silver cart was taking them. The last words of Nifflepok rang unpleasantly in her ears, and as they raced by a cave marked Potter's Den, the Goat Girl positively shuddered. Here, set out in vast silver pots and buried to their chins in the silver earth, were scores of the King's pale-faced prisoners. A grim-looking gardener was watering them from a milk can, and from the hungry way they lapped up the few drops that fell to them, Handy concluded that this was probably their only food. "First I shot over a mountain, and now I'm shooting through one," moaned the distracted Goat Girl, trying to collect her spinning thoughts and faculties. "Oh, my eye! We're going to pot for sure. Oh, this time we really are done for." Then, all at once, Handy's good common sense began to assert itself, and as their strange chariot with a sudden increase of speed and power again dashed down into the darkness, she snatched the precious blue flower from her pocket, And at the exact moment the silver car turned over and flung them into space, Handy began pulling the petals from the flower and letting them drift down ahead of her own rapidly falling body. It was just light enough for her to see Nox, with bristling horns and quivering nostrils, fall past, when she herself started to turn so many and such dizzying somersaults, she lost all count of time and distance. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Handy Mandy and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12. Prisoners of the Wizard. What seemed to be hours later, though in reality it was only a few moments, the two luckless prisoners found themselves side by side on a heap of soft blue flower petals. They were in a small circular pit with one amethyst burning dimly in the grating that covered the top. The Goat Girl had no recollection of her final landing, and gazing up at the grilled ceiling, wondered dully how they had come through without being cut to pieces. "It tilted," wheezed the Royal Ox, answering the unspoken question in Handy's eyes. "Just tilted and slid us down. A fortunate thing you kept that magic flower, m'lass. Weakly, and still trembling in every limb, Nox tried to rise, but his legs gave way beneath him, and for a good 15 minutes he and the Goat Girl rested on the flower petals, saying never a word. The tapping of footsteps in the corridor brought Handy quickly to her feet, and as Nox managed to heave himself upright, the blue petals vanished, leaving only a tiny flower on the floor. Handy had just time to stuff it into her pocket when an invisible door in the side of the pit opened, and 12 depressed workmen in silver cloth caps and overalls stepped inside. They carried brooms, mops, and dustpans, and stood staring in dismay at the 7-armed Goat Girl and angry-looking Ox. We were sent to brush up," stuttered the first workman, touching his cap uneasily, "but there seems—" "To be nothing to brush," finished Handy sarcastically. "Sorry to disappoint you. Now get out," ordered the Goat Girl furiously, and seizing buckets, brooms, and mops from their nerveless fingers, Handy pummeled them left and right with her 7 hands. "Get out, and don't come back till Christmas," she panted, as the workmen, tumbling over one another, clawed open the door and banged it to behind them. The knob was on the other side of the pit, and not even the edges of the door were now visible. "What a place!" groaned Handy Mandy, leaning dejectedly against the side of their prison. "What a king! And he looks so nice," grieved the Goat Girl, sliding down to a sitting position and holding her head in all of her hands. "Never mind," said the Ox, settling on the floor beside her. "He hasn't got the best of us yet. It was pretty clever of you to remember that flower, but what I can't understand is why you did not tell him at once that we did have this silver hammer he is so anxious to possess. Then we could have traded the hammer for the release of Kerry." "I don't trust him," answered the Goat Girl somberly. "Why should I trust that wizard as far as a goat can butt? Didn't you hear him say the hammer was the second most important magic in Oz? Didn't you hear him say he was stealing and planning to steal the best magic from all the 4 kingdoms to make himself supreme ruler of Oz? Well, now that Five has brought him this jug-a-rug or whatever it is, and Ozma's own magic picture, he's probably well on the way to realizing his ambitions. But he's not going to get our silver hammer. I found it, and I'm going to keep it, for it's far safer with me than with him. Do you suppose we're going to help an old bozzywog like that? What good would it do to put Kerry back on his throne if Wutz is to be ruler of Oz? He'd probably pot all the kings and keep everything for himself. Very probably, agreed Nox, wagging his head mournfully. But what are we to do? Are we an army to fight a mountain full of silver moles and minions? Are we magicians to risk our necks with this wizard? Besides, Nox's face grew thin and anxious. If Wutz has treated Kerry the way he has treated us, the boy needs us right now and this very minute. But didn't you hear him say he'd put Kerry back on the throne if Nine did not soon find the hammer? Put in Handy patiently. That proves the little king is still here and safe. Of course, we must find him and get him out of this miserable mountain. But we're not going to give Wutz our hammer or any help at all, and he can put that in his silver pipe and blow bubbles till he bursts, said Handy vindictively. Now, the thing to do is to rest and eat, then set ourselves to find the way out of this pit and this mountain. Wutz and Nifflepock think we're all swept away by this time. Besides, they'll be too busy talking with Five to bother us. So first to eat and then to think, proposed Handy in a businesslike manner. Perhaps you're right, sighed the Ox. But I'll not have an easy moment till we're out of this magic mountain. That ride! Nox lashed his tail and rolled his eyes at the mere thought of their dash down the underground railway. Did you experience anything like it in your life? Well, grinned Handy, it's one way of seeing the country, I suppose. But let's not look back, old Tockins. Let's look ahead. Remember, we still have the dwarf of the hammer on our side, and when we are ready to leave, he'll surely show us the way. Not before I put a few gores in that wizard's pants and plants, rumbled Nox belligerently. I'll teach him to take liberties with the Royal Ox of Keretaria. Hi-yi, that's the old Oz spirit, cheered Handy, reaching out to touch his golden horn. Horn, dear. Just served 2 dinners and no fooling. Unscrewing Nox's horn of plenty as she spoke, the Goat Girl held it quietly in her wooden hand. And there was certainly no fooling about the 2 splendid dinners the horn delivered in answer to Handy's wish. Never had she eaten a more appetizing repast, and half of the prison pit was taken up by the fresh hay, fruit and grains brought to satisfy the hunger of the Royal Ox. So, forgetting for a time their awful danger and their disagreeable imprisonment, the 2 adventurers refreshed themselves, and after the dishes and containers had disappeared, settled down to evolve some plan to outwit the Wizard of Wutz. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Handy Mandy and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 13. In the Imperial City of Oz. 10 days before the Goat Girl left Mount Mern, a weary and footsore pilgrim arrived in the Emerald City. At least he gave that impression to all who saw him shuffling with his long staff and beggar's cup along the shining streets of the capital. The man's head was clean shaven, and his small cap, coarse-belted robe and sandals marked him as a monk of some old and ancient order. He nodded gently to each person he passed, and seemed, in spite of his many years and wrinkles, innocent and harmless as a child. The splendor and magnificence of the capital astonished and bewildered the old gentleman, and in a sort of stupefied disbelief he stared at the emerald-studded streets and houses, and gazed up at the lofty peaks and spires of the royal palace. And this was not strange, For of all the fairy cities out of the world, the Emerald City of Oz is the most dazzling and beautiful. But its citizens are kindly and simple for all that, and many stopped to drop emeralds in the pilgrim's cup and ask him if there was anything else that he needed. To all he mumbled in a strange and indistinguishable tongue, and seeing that he was bound for the palace, and sure that Ozma herself would know best how to deal with him, the Emerald Cityites let him go his way unmolested. The afternoon was warm and pleasant, and Ozma and some of her favorites were having a lazy game of croquet in the royal garden. The click of the gold mallets as they tapped the gold balls presently attracted the attention of the old wayfarer, who paused to peer curiously over the hedge. The simple summer dresses of the girls in the garden seemed out of all keeping with their majestic surroundings. Except for Ozma's frock, which was longer, the emerald crown on her dark curls and the golden circlets worn by her three companions, they might have been any four little girls playing croquet in a garden. But all around them were the unmistakable signs of rank and royalty. At ease under a lime tree stood a tall soldier with green whiskers leaning on his gun. Three footmen in satin uniforms stood stiffly beside an emerald-topped tea-table, ready at a moment's notice to serve Ozade and frosted cake. On a gold bench nearby, a straw-stuffed scarecrow was quietly reading the paper, and walking arm in arm down a little path, talking composedly together, were an energetic little man with a bald head and a curious fellow who seemed to be constructed entirely of copper. To all who are familiar with the quaint and merry folk at Ozma's court, there would be nothing odd about a live scarecrow or a mechanical man, and most of us would have recognized Ozma's companions at once as Dorothy, Betsy and Trot, three mortal girls who long ago came to live in the royal palace. It was Dorothy who had discovered the Scarecrow on her first visit to Oz, lifting him down from his pole and traveling in his gay and carefree company all the way to Emerald City. In those days, the Wizard of Oz had been ruler of the country, he himself having flown in a balloon from Omaha. Astonished by the circus tricks of this little fellow, the Ozians believed him to be a real wizard, making him their sovereign, and under his wise rule and direction built the now famous City of Emeralds. The sight of Dorothy had made the humbug wizard homesick, and after presenting the Scarecrow with a fine set of brains, he flew off to America in a balloon of his own construction, leaving the straw man to rule in his place. Afterward, when Ozma was disenchanted and proved to be the rightful ruler of Oz, the Scarecrow had cheerfully resigned. But he still spends most of his time in the palace, and is one of Ozma's most trusted friends and counselors. Later, the wizard himself returned to Oz, and this time took up the study of magic with such zeal and earnestness he was soon famous from one end of the country to the other. This made him exceedingly valuable to the young fairy ruler, and he, like the Scarecrow, is an old and honored member of Ozma's cabinet. It was the wizard who was now talking so earnestly to Tik-Tok. The Metal Man was another of Dorothy's discoveries. She met Tik-Tok on her second visit to Oz and brought him to the Emerald City for safekeeping. Tik-Tok, made by the firm of Smith and Tinker, is a completely mechanical man and a loyal and dependable citizen when he is properly wound up and oiled. Betsy and Trot, like Dorothy, arrived more or less by wind, wave and accident in the Land of Oz. They liked it so well and proved so gay and amusing, Ozma begged them to stay with her and Dorothy in the Green Castle and help rule the many merry kingdoms that make up her wonderful empire. This they were only too happy to do, so here they are, princesses in their own right and living in the most gorgeous city out of the world. Besides these celebrities in the garden, there are numerous other important people at Ozma's court. For instance, there is Herbie, the medicine man, whose chest is really a medicine chest full of pills, cures, and ointments. Then there is Scraps, a lively girl made from a patchwork quilt by a wizard's wife, and brought to life by the wizard. And there's Pegasus, a flying pig. There's a doubtful dromedary, a cowardly lion, a hungry tiger, and Dorothy's little dog Toto, a glass cat belonging to Scraps, a wooden sawhorse belonging to Ozma, an Iffin whom Jack Pumpkinhead discovered near the Land of Barons, and a dozen more unique and unusual characters. The old pilgrim seemed to find the group in the garden surprising enough, for he watched them closely and silently for almost 10 minutes, cupping his hand behind his ear in an endeavor to catch what the wizard was saying. "It is just as I have told you," the little wizard was remarking earnestly to Tik-Tok. "The great record book of Glinda has vanished from her castle without trace or reason, and even with my powerful searchlight and looking glasses, I have been unable to discover any signs of it. Word of the theft came yesterday by pigeon post." "Someone has stolen it for no good purpose," answered the metal man solemnly. But the old man leaning over the hedge heard none of this, for the two were conversing in a low and guarded tones. So after a long puzzled look at the Scarecrow, the pilgrim took up his staff and shuffled along the gold-pebbled path to the palace itself. A pompous footman in gold and green came to answer his timid knock at the door. "What name, please? What business? And why in the wood does a fellow like you come begging at the door of a castle?" inquired the footman in a loud, displeased voice. "There, there, Puff-Up," admonished a rosy-cheeked maid in a ribboned cap and apron, peering around the wide shoulders of the footman. "Don't be so shouting proud. You frightened the old gentleman half out of his wits. Can't you see he is tired and hungry and probably in need of a lunch?" At the little maid's kind speech, the pilgrim bowed at least a dozen times, nodding his head energetically to show that she was perfectly right in her conjecture. "Come along with you," urged Jellia Jam, giving him a friendly wink. Edging nervously past the muttering footman, the old beggar followed Jellia into the castle's spacious and splendid dining hall. "Wait right here and I'll bring you some cake and apple sauce, an omelet and a pot of tea," promised the obliging girl. "How will that be?" Jellia Jam, who was Ozma's own personal maid and a privileged character around the castle, grinned cheerfully at her ancient visitor, and though the old monk pretended not to understand a word that she said, he nevertheless seated himself at the table and with round eyes watched her skip through the swinging door into the pantry. No sooner had Jellia disappeared than the old rascal sprang nimbly to his feet and began to peer eagerly all around him. Passing hurriedly over a rich gold service on the sideboard, he pounced upon an earthen jug on a crystal stand and, tucking it under his robe, slipped silently as a shadow out of the dining hall, up the green carpeted stairs and straight into the private sitting room of Ozma of Oz. Once there, and without losing a moment, he walked to the west wall, took down a large gold-framed picture, blew upon it with a small glass tube till it was no larger than a cake of chocolate, and thrust it into an inner pocket. Then, holding his robe high above his skinny shins and with the jug clasped tightly in his arms, he galloped down the stairs and out an open window into the garden, reaching a large clump of snowball bushes without encountering anyone. Hiding himself well in the bushes, he tore off the monk's robe, turned it inside out, dragged a white wig from his sock, and presently emerged as dignified and plausible an old grandmother as anyone would wish to see. The other side of his monk's robe was green and made up in a style much affected by old ladies in the capital, so that now he attracted no attention whatever. The jug, in a large string bag, dangled carelessly from his wrist, and smiling and nodding amiably he hurried through the garden, passed rapidly down one street and another, through the high city gates, on and on, till he was far out in the country, walking faster and faster and less like a monk or an old lady at every step. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Handy Mandy and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 14. The Robbery is Discovered. Prunes and peppermints! Ejaculated the Scarecrow, springing up from his bench as Jellia Jam, with streaming eyes and cap ribbons, came flying across the garden. Peanuts and pretzels! Dorothy, about to hit the pole and win the game, dropped her mallet at Jellia's fire siren screeches, while Ozma and the others swung round in amazement as the little waiting maid, sobbing and panting, rushed into their midst. "Oh, that beggar! Oh, that pilgrim! That old monk or whatever he was!" wailed Jellia, wiping her eyes on the corner of her apron. "He's gone and stolen the rug, and Oz knows what will become of us." "There, there, my girl, stop crying. Begin at the beginning and tell us just what happened," begged the Scarecrow, patting Jellia clumsily on the shoulder. "But this is serious, very serious," muttered the Wizard, who had at once realized the importance of the little maid's news. "If Ruggedo is released from that jug and enchantment, he'll be up to his old tricks in no time and doing anything in his power to hurt and destroy us." "But who could have known we turned Ruggedo into a jug, or where the jug was kept? And why would anyone steal an old earthenware pitcher when there are so many other rare and beautiful objects in the palace?" Ozma, looking anxious and troubled, seated herself on the bench beside the Scarecrow. "The same person who knew the value of Glinda's record book and stole that," answered the Wizard gloomily. "Dark forces are at work in Oz, my dear, dark forces. Just how did this rascal look, Jellia?" "Like an old monk with a beggar's cup," said the little maid with a sorrowful sniff. "He seemed so poor and hungry, I went off to get him something to eat, and no sooner was my back turned than he grabbed the jug and ran off, though he shuffled slowly enough when he came into the palace." "Disguised, of course," observed the Scarecrow, raising one eyebrow, "and no more a monk than I am. But what was he monkeying around here for? And what could he want with that jug, even if he knew it was the old Gnome King? Really, you know, you shouldn't let perfect strangers into the palace, Jellia." "Just what I was telling her," wheezed Puff-Up, breathlessly adding himself to the group on the lawn. "And I hope this will be a lesson to you, miss." "If we just knew where the old villain came from," worried the Wizard, tapping his fingers absently on Tik-Tok's copper arm. "Or where he was going," finished Dorothy, pushing back her crown. "Why not look in the magic picture?" proposed the machine man calmly. "The picture would show us where he is now." "Of course it would!" Ozma rewarded Tik-Tok with a bright smile, and jumping up, the little fairy hurried across the garden and into the palace with the others just a few steps behind her. But when they reached the small sitting room where the magic picture was hung, of course it was not there. And now in real distress and consternation, they all sat down to discuss the mysterious forces working against them. "I thought Ruggedo was the only enemy I had left," sighed Ozma, leaning wearily back in her satin-tufted armchair. "I thought when we turned the Gnome King to a jug, all our troubles would be over." "Whoever stole the jug knows that Ruggedo was once the powerful metal monarch who tried again and again to conquer Oz," rasped Tik-Tok, in his slow and precise fashion. "Right," agreed the wizard, striding up and down with his hands clasped behind his back. "And whoever stole that jug and the magic picture plans to disenchant the Gnome King and learn from him the best way to destroy us." "But that will be pretty difficult," asserted the little wizard, thrusting out his chin. "That transformation was one of the best you ever made, my dear Ozma. One of the best. It will take a pretty smart wizard to turn that jug back to rug again." "Whoever stole the jug and Ozma's magic picture was pretty smart," Betsy Bobbin reminded him seriously. "And without the picture, how are we going to find out who it is? Can't you do something, Wiz dear? Or do we just have to sit around and wait to be conquered?" "I shall go to my laboratory at once," decided the wizard importantly, "and there by some magic means I'll try to discover who is at the bottom of all this wretched plotting and thievery. Lock up the magic treasures in your safe, Ozma, especially the Gnome King's magic belt, and have them guarded day and night." Briskly, the little wizard rushed out of the room, returning in a moment to repeat gloomily, "Day and night." "And I'll go and drill the army," declared the Scarecrow, stepping recklessly out an open French window and falling flat, but undaunted, in a flower bed below. "And I'd better call Tige and the Cowardly Lion," said Dorothy, who had always found the lion a splendid fighter in spite of his cowardice, and the Hungry Tiger ready at the drop of a handkerchief to protect his royal patrons with tooth and claw. "They can sit right here beside the safe, and I'd just like to see anyone get by them." "Maybe it will be someone they cannot see," shivered Betsy, peering out into the darkening garden. "Oh my, isn't it too exciting?" Trot, bouncing up and down on a small sofa, leaned over to touch Ozma on the knee. "It reminds me of the time Ugu the Shoemaker stole all the magic treasures in Oz, remember?" Ozma, looking at the space where her magic picture had hung, nodded her head sorrowfully, saddened and sobered by the thought that she still had dangerous and unscrupulous enemies in Oz. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Handy Mandy and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15. The Pilgrim Returns to the Mountain. Traveling northward by foot and as quickly as he could, Number 5 had come to the Silver King's Mountain just a few moments after Nox and Handy Mandy. Now, dressed in the silver armor and helmet worn by all the wizard's men, he waited in great agitation for the wizard to appear. Nifflepok had at once taken 5 to the den where Wutz carried on all his magic experiments and kept his valuable treasures, and, quite sure none of the other agents had been as successful as he, 5 paced impatiently up and down, fancying himself already co-ruler with the wizard in Oz. "So there you are at last." Entering from an invisible door in the back of his workshop, Wutz stared coldly at 5. "Well, what trash is it that you have stolen?" he was asked finally. The wizard always pretended the discoveries of his agents were of little use and importance, but when 5, completely taken aback and crestfallen, began to explain the wonderful properties of the magic picture and the fact that the old jug had once been the powerful king of the gnomes, the Silver Monarch cut him short. "Yes, yes, but just see what 7 has brought," he told him gloatingly. 7, by a trick known only to himself, has stolen and transported to our mountain the great record book of Glinda the Good Sorceress. Following the direction of the King's imperious finger, 5 gazed jealously at a huge volume chained with golden chains to its marble stand. "In that book," went on the wizard quickly, "everything that ever happened in Oz is recorded. Not only everything that has happened, but everything that is happening. You can see the entries appearing at this very minute on the open page. I see, I see. Five scarcely glanced at the record book. But this magic picture shows you any person you desire to look at. With this picture and the help of the powerful Gnome King, now disguised as a jug, we can soon make ourselves rulers of Oz. All we need to do is release Ruggedo from his enchantment. I've been told by people in the Emerald City that Ruggedo is familiar with all the magic secrets of Ozma and the Wizard of Oz, and is besides a skillful magician himself. Once we have disenchanted him, everything will be easy. We? We? Sneered Wutz, who secretly agreed with Five, but would not give him the satisfaction of knowing it. Well, put the picture there on that stand so I can examine it. Show us this silly ruler of Oz who sets herself above all other rulers, he ordered sharply. Where is she now and what is she doing? Then, though the wizard and Five and Nifflepok, who had come noiselessly into the workshop, gazed into the canvas till their eyes stung and watered, not a single figure appeared to enlighten them. Ha! A hoax! Raged the Silver King, rushing at Five and shaking him till his armor rattled. How dare you fool me in this dangerous manner? But it's not a hoax, screamed Five as soon as he could speak. It worked perfectly well in the castle. Perhaps it was hurt when you reduced it to carry it here, put in Nifflepok nervously. He was always trying to keep peace between the cruel king and his subjects. Perhaps it only obeys the commands of Ozma, its rightful owner. And remember, you still have the jug and the magic record book. The record book might even explain about the picture, he suggested hopefully. I thought so. It says here, the magic picture and rug, the jug, have been stolen from the castle of Ozma of Oz by an agent of the Silver King. There! Exclaimed Five, brushing himself off indignantly. I told you it was the one and only picture. Yes, but what good is it to me if it doesn't work? Scoffed the wizard. I'll not have you potted this time, Five, but next time don't bring me damaged goods and old jugs. Bring something of real value. As Five, red-faced and furious, jerked himself out of the king's presence, Wutz turned joyfully to Nifflepok. Getting on, old Tubbykins, we're getting on. Without that magic picture, Ozma will not be able to trace her stolen property, and without the record book, Glinda will not be able to help her. So who's to stop us from stealing everything, everything? Exulted Wutz, picking up the earthen jug and waving it over his head. But do you think it wise to treat our agents so shabbily? Sighed Nifflepok. They might betray us, you know. Oh, no, they won't, sniffed the wizard, grinning broadly at his anxious little assistant. The way I treat them is perfectly all right. Keeps them on their toes. And with each trying to outdo the other, we get the best results. Well, I hope you're right. Nifflepok still looked unconvinced. But I cannot help thinking. Out of your line, Niffy. Just leave the thinking to me. Now fetch me my magic blower, that's a good fellow, till I see what can be done with this jug. It may take some time and doing to release this ugly little gnome. By the way, did you pulverize those meddling munchkins? Oh, yes. Nifflepok nodded his head with a little shudder of distaste. I shot them down into the prisoner's pit just as your Majesty commanded. That's strange. The wizard, in crossing the den to fetch a glass test tube, had paused for a moment beside the book of records. It says here, the goat girl from Mern and the royal ox are in the Silver King's mountain planning to release the little king of Keretaria. So that's what brought them here, mused the wizard softly. Now then, Nifflepok, something must have slipped up instead of down. If your prisoners were powdered or pulverized, how could they be planning and plotting? They must have some powerful magic to help them, muttered Nifflepok, or how could they have survived that fall? Better find out, my dear fellow. Go spy on those Munchkins, and if their magic is important or worthwhile, come back and tell me. And in the future, be more careful how you carry out my orders and instructions. The wizard's voice was still low and pleasant, but his eyes flashed so threateningly, Nifflepok rushed out of the royal work den, flung himself in the silver car, and went speeding down to the prison pits at the bottom of the mountain. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Handy Mandy and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16. The Wizard's Bargain. While Nifflepok had been interviewing Five, Handy and Nox had been having a troublesome conference of their own. Each plan they devised for finding the little king and escaping from the Silver King's mountain proved impractical. To summon the Hammer Elf to release them from the prison pit would probably rouse the underground guards and minions of the wizard, and give Wutz himself an opportunity to steal the hammer. To tap the hammer lightly and ask the advice of himself had next seemed a good idea, but as Nox quickly pointed out, that too was dangerous. "In a wizard's den like this, anything can happen," groaned the Ox, looking around with a gloomy eye. "How do we know we are not being watched at this very moment? If you so much as show that hammer, somebody may pounce in here and snatch it away, which will leave us with nothing to protect ourselves with in a last emergency, except that blue flower, my horns, and your hands." Handy did not like the sound of last emergency, but even Handy realized that they would not escape from the mountain without some sort of battle. To the free and sun-loving mountain girl, every minute underground was sheer torture. She longed for a breath of the pure upper air, and the unreal light and pale faces of Wutz's underground citizens and workers filled her with pity and loathing. "Of course, no matter how long they leave us here, your Horn of Plenty will keep us from starving, but if we don't soon find some way out, I believe I'll explode," she choked in a desperate voice. "Let's look at the message in that silver ball again," suggested Nox unexpectedly. "Are you sure you read it all, m'lass? There might have been directions on the other side." "I don't think so," said Handy, shaking her head. Then, because action of any sort was a relief, she deftly twisted off Nox's left horn and tilted the silver balls into one of her always handy palms. The first ball, when she opened it, contained nothing further than the silver key. In the center of the second lay the same folded paper, but this time, when Handy unfolded the paper, there was a new message inside. "Wait," cautioned the little slip of paper in small blue letters. "Do nothing until the wizard appears." "Oh," breathed the Royal Ox, touching the paper gently with his nose. "Someone is helping us." "Then I'd better keep this silver ball in my pocket," decided the Goat Girl, "where I can easily get at it. In a tight corner I might not have a chance to unscrew your horn. Dear ear, how puzzling it all grows. So we're to hear from the wizard again. Whist! What was that?" As Handy, with her wooden hand, slipped the first ball back into the horn, with her leather hand screwed the horn back on Nox's head, and with her best white hands stuffed the second ball and message into her pocket, they heard the agitated footsteps pattering along the outside corridor. After a tense moment, however, they died away, and exchanging a relieved glance, Nox and Handy settled down to wait for the wizard. The footsteps, as you have already guessed, belonged to Nifflepok. Peering in at them through an invisible window, the king's messenger had been just in time to see Handy shaking the silver balls from the golden horn. Without waiting to see what use they would make of this curious magic, Nifflepok rushed back to inform his master. "They are wizards!" he panted, bursting unceremoniously into the Silver King's den. "The magic is in the ox's horn. With my own eyes I saw the seven-armed maiden shaking silver balls from his horn." "What do I care about silver balls?" snarled Wutz, who was in a terrible temper. "If I had them here I'd bounce you over the head with them." The den was full of sulphurous smoke, but an earthenware jug still stood unchanged on the table before him. "The magic in the Emerald City is still better than mine," hissed the Silver Monarch, his voice quivering with anger and disappointment. "I've tried every single formula in my book of incantations, every straight and crooked pass in the magician's manual, every powder and potion on my shelves, and this ugly jug is still a jug, and nothing but a jug. What are we going to do?" he yelled furiously. "Think of something, you noodle-headed pig! I must have the help of this little gnome king, but how am I going to get him out of the jug?" "Perhaps with a little more time," faltered Nifflepok, twisting his high hat nervously in his hands. "Time? Time?" exploded the wizard. "When did time ever break an enchantment?" Snatching up a pair of silver pliers, he flung them wrathfully at his assistant. Nifflepok, fortunately for his head, caught the dangerous missile in his hat, and darting behind a tall cabinet, looked pleadingly out at his unreasonable master. "Wait, wait!" he begged earnestly, as Wutz, with a menacing frown, took up his silver bubble pipe. "I have thought of something. Make these Munchkins break the Gnome King's enchantment. They have passed all the hazards of our mountain unharmed. Undoubtedly the girl is a sorceress, and the ox is a powerful magician in disguise. Let them do this trifling service for your Majesty in return for the useless captive we are holding for number 9. Deliberately, the Silver Monarch put down his pipe. "That's not a bad idea, Niffle. Not a bad idea at all." Picking up the jug, Wutz brushed rudely by his trembling little minister and hurried out of his workshop. A few minutes later he stood, bowing and smiling before the two travelers in the prisoner's pit. But, warned by the message in the silver ball, his entrance through the invisible door neither frightened nor impressed Handy Mandy or the Royal Ox. "So here you are at last!" exclaimed the Goat Girl, looking the Silver Monarch sternly in the eye. "And about time, too! How dare you imprison us in this miserable pit for no reason at all?" "Oh, yes, there is a reason," stated Wutz, a little surprised at Handy's defiance. "You broke into my mountain without invitation or permission, and as you are nothing but a pair of trespassers, you certainly deserve imprisonment and even destruction." "Nonsense!" snorted the Royal Ox, lurching forward heavily. "We came here seeking a lost boy whom you are unlawfully holding captive. As soon as you release the little King of Keretaria, we will take him and leave this mountain." "And the sooner you tell us where he is, the better," added Handy, snapping her 35 fingers under the Silver King's nose. "Ah, you think so?" sneered Wutz. "Well, nothing is ever given for nothing in this mountain, but I may give you a chance to earn the boy's release. Here in my hand is a jug, an ordinary enough looking jug. With the magic you have in your possession, you must transform this jug to its proper shape. If you succeed, You and the ox and the boy, king of Carataria, may leave my mountain unharmed. If you fail, ha ha! The heartless wizard threw back his head and laughed uproariously. If you fail, the walls of this pit will contract until you are, well, shall we say, obliterated? To keep your part of the bargain and perform this slight service, I will give you 1/2 hour. Here is the jug, and in case you fail, goodbye. Good Gillikins, whistled Nox, as the wizard strode through the invisible door and left them alone. What does that fool think we are? Wizards? Magicians? Necromancers? Groaning and snorting, he began to gallop round and round the hot little pit. Look out! Look out! You'll break the jug, warned Handy, snatching it up in her arms. And for goat's sake, stop that galloping. I'm dizzy enough as it is. But you heard what he said, lowed the ox, coming to a trembling stop beside her. What are we to do? We know nothing of magic or magic transformations. In their distress and excitement, they both forgot there might be a message to help them in the silver ball, and Handy, taking the jug in one of her white hands, surveyed it with horror and curiosity. It's so old and ugly now, said the Goat Girl slowly. I'll bet it was something old and ugly to begin with. Didn't Nifflepok mention something about a jug that was a rug? Maybe it's a rug, though more likely a rogue. Say, I wonder if I broke the jug, whether that would not break the enchantment. No, 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 don't do that, begged Nox, rolling his eyes in terror. If you break the jug, the wizard will be furious. And how do you know what will break the spell? Here, let me look at it. Passing the jug rapidly from one hand to another, Handy started to place it on the floor under Nox's nose with her seventh and last hand, when a sudden and unexpected scream from the interior made her drop it with a loud crash to the silver stones. Ouch! Oh, stop! How dare you bang me around in this hateful manner? Up from the flying fragments of earthenware at Handy's feet sprang a fierce little gnome with a long ragged beard, shaking his fists and howling like a child. Oh my, I've actually done it, quavered the Goat Girl, falling over against Nox. Look, look, didn't I tell you it would be old and ugly? The gnome, at Handy's words, suddenly stopped howling. Where am I? Where am I? Who am I? He mumbled in a frightened voice. Well, I don't know who you are, but I'm afraid you're in a pretty bad place, said Handy, straightening up to have a better look at her handiwork. You're in the underground caverns of the King of the Silver Mountain, if you must know. Caverns? Beamed the gnome, his face breaking into a wide smile. What's the matter with caverns? I love caverns. Why, I used to live in one myself. And who did you say I was? We don't know who you are, explained Nox in a cautious voice. A moment ago, and before Handy took you in hand, you were nothing but a jug. A jug? Pondered the gnome, pulling his beard thoughtfully. You mean to say I was a jug? Maybe was a jug's your name, volunteered the Goat Girl, now quite interested in her transformation. No, not was a jug, but something like a jug. Let me think. Bug, hug, chug, mug, pug, rug. Rug? That's it. That's my name. Ruggetto! Shrieked the little gnome joyfully. And now I know who I am. Well, who are you? Inquired the ox, stretching his royal nose down toward the whirling gnome. I? Why, I am the most important king on the other side of the desert, shouted Ruggetto exultantly. I am the one and only Metal Monarch and ruler of all the gnomes. My caves and caverns under the mountains of Ev sparkle with jewels and precious stones mined by my faithful workers, and my grand army of gnomes outnumbers any army in Oz. Proudly the ragged little king thumped himself upon the chest. Oh my! Oh me! Oh mercy Ercy! If you're as powerful as all that, maybe you'll help us, cried the Goat Girl, clasping her hands eagerly. Help you? Why should I help you? The little gnome stared scornfully at the two occupants of the cave. Because she broke your jug and enchantment, you ungrateful little wretch, snorted Nox, lowering his horns. And you don't look like a king to me. You just look like a plain, ordinary, wicked little ragamuffin. A ragamuffin, he bellowed angrily. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Handy Mandy and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 17. Out of the Prison Pit. Nox's angry words had a strange effect on the boastful Gnome King. Leaning dejectedly against the side of the pit, he drew his hand wearily across his forehead. I remember now, he told them hoarsely. I was once the powerful Metal Monarch, but that was before I fell into the hands of Ozma and that wicked Wizard of Oz. So it was Ozma who turned you to a jug, exclaimed Handy with all her hands on her hips. Yes, and before that she deprived me of my kingdom, ducked me in a truth pond, marooned me for years on a desert island, struck me dumb, and then, when she could think of nothing worse, turned me to this jug, screamed Ruggedo, kicking at the fragments of broken china at his feet. You and Ozma have been enemies for a long time, then? Observed the Ox, looking at the gnome with great disfavor. Yes, yes. Ever since that girl Dorothy stole my magic belt and gave it to Ozma, raged Ruggedo, stamping furiously up and down. And every time I try to recover my own property or capture those wretched girls and the Emerald City, something goes wrong and they conquer me. The last time Ozma turned me to a jug, cried Ruggedo, his voice rising to a shrill whistle. Well, what did you expect? Inquired Handy Mandy sharply. That Ozma would sit calmly on her throne and allow you to conquer her? My eye, such goings on. Oh, then you are friends of Ozma, said the Gnome King suspiciously. But no, you could not be her friends, or you would not have broken the jug. Who are you? The Ox is usual enough except for his golden horns, but you... Ruggedo's eyes grew round and anxious as he looked at the seven-armed Goat Girl. You are odd, aren't you? No, she's not odd, snapped the Royal Ox severely. He had been through so much with the sturdy mountain lass, he felt almost as if they were related. Handy is just 7 times as smart and 7 times as handy as most people, that's all. And since her 7 hands have served you pretty well, try to keep a civil tongue in your head, will you? Oh, all right. Ruggedo, scuffing his foot, looked sulkily from one to the other. Much obliged, I'm sure. But what in rockets are we doing in this miserable hole? And what are we waiting for? For a fellow Metal Monarch and Wizard, answered a smooth voice, and appearing as quietly as he had vanished, Wutz stood calmly before them. Come with me, Ruggedo. I have surprising news for you, comrade. And without so much as a nod or thank you to Nox and Handy Mandy, he linked his arm through the gnome's and drew him through the invisible door, slamming it viciously behind him. Hi, yelled Handy Mandy indignantly. Come back here! Come back here! A bargain's a bargain, you old cheat and villain. We've kept our part, and you shall keep yours. Where have you hidden the little king of Carrotaria? Let us out! Let us out, you false-faced rascal! Nox, as angry as Handy, charged forward, butting his head against the exact spot where the wizard had disappeared. To his astonishment and joy, the whole section of wall swung outward, and he and the Goat Girl, rushing through, found themselves in a narrow, dimly lit silver tunnel. "To think we could have got out any time," gulped the Royal Ox in a vexed voice. "The door was invisible, but not locked. Imagine that, m'lass." "Oh, I've got other things to do," puffed Handy, peering down the long passageway to see whether she could catch a glimpse of the two kings. "No use trying to imagine anything about this mountain. It's just plain bewitched and goblinish. But that wizard made us a promise, and I'm going to see that he keeps it. Come on." "No, no," said the Royal Ox, leaning weakly against the side of the tunnel. "I couldn't bear to look at him again. At least, not just yet. Wait. I may think of something else. Wait!" bellowed Nox, as Handy, in spite of his pleas, started off on a run. "There now, you've dropped something out of your pocket." "The silver ball," muttered Handy, scooping it up without slackening her pace. "The ball! The ball!" exclaimed Nox, galloping breathlessly to catch up with her. "Oh, what muddleheads! What muddleheads! It told us to wait for the wizard. Quick, see what it says now." "Well, a lot of good it did waiting for that wizard," grumbled the Goat Girl, but nevertheless she stopped and opened the silver ball. Taking out the folded paper, she held it up toward an amethyst gleaming dully in the side of the tunnel. "Follow me," directed the paper rather mysteriously. "But who does me mean?" asked Handy, as Nox, still breathing heavily, read the message over her shoulder. "I don't see any me, do you? Beans and butternuts! If you hadn't stopped me, I'd have caught those villains by this time." "And what good would that have done?" sniffed the Ox impatiently. "Remember, there are two of them now, and that little gnome is worse than Wutz and twice as dangerous." Closing his eyes in an effort to concentrate, Nox repeated the message. "Follow me, follow me, follow me. Why, of course, it's as plain as oats," he snorted joyfully. "Me means that ball. Put the message back in the ball, set the ball down, and then see what happens." And what happened was amazing enough, for the silver ball, once it was on the floor of the tunnel, began to roll rapidly along ahead of them, faster and faster and faster, till Handy and Nox had all they could do to keep it in sight. "Where do you suppose it's taking us?" gasped the Goat Girl, thankful that so far the tunnel had been more or less straight and fairly well lighted. "To Kerry," said the Royal Ox positively. "Now watch that turn, m'lass. What's ahead? It's growing so dark I can't even see my own shadow." "It's a flight of steps," whispered Handy, gazing fearfully into the deep well of a circular stairway winding down into the darkness. They could hear the chink of the silver ball as it rolled from step to step. So, taking her courage in all hands, the Goat Girl herself began to descend. Nox, grunting and muttering lugubriously, came just behind her. Steps were difficult enough for the Ox at any time, but negotiating a flight of circular steps in pitch darkness was terrifying and dangerous in the extreme. "Be careful," warned Handy, looking up anxiously. "Don't slip or you'll break my heart."
"More than that, I'm afraid,"
quavered the Royal Ox, setting his front feet cautiously on the step below while he balanced his hind quarters perilously on the one above. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Handy Mandy and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 18. Wutz and the Gnome King leave for the capital. Meanwhile, Wutz and Ruggedo had shot up in the wizard's silver car and were now in earnest conversation together. "How in suds did that girl break your enchantment?" asked Wutz, dropping irritably to his silver workbench. "I was watching her every minute through an invisible window, and I didn't see her do a thing but break the jug. Now, why couldn't I have thought of that?" "Oh, what does it matter?" Ruggedo settled himself with a joyful little wriggle beside the silver monarch. "What does it matter so long as I am free and able to help you? So you really think you can make yourself ruler of Oz?" he went on, glancing enviously round the wizard's well-stocked den, with its tables full of magic apparatus and its shelves and shelves of dusty volumes of wizard and witch works. Wutz had confided his plans and intentions to Ruggedo on the ride up. "Say," exclaimed the Gnome King suddenly, "how did you get Glinda's record book? That's the most important treasure in her castle." "Of course." Lazily the wizard reached for his silver pipe. "Well, it's a long story, Rug, but I don't mind telling you that I have agents working in every kingdom of the country. 7, who was assigned to the Quadling country, brought in the record book, smallifying it in order to steal and carry it here, and restoring it to proper size when it arrived. 6 and 11 have brought me useful magic from the Winkies and Gillikins, but 5 managed to steal Ozma's own magic picture, and ha! Since he couldn't find the Gnome King's belt, he brought me the Gnome King himself. Pretty clever of him to discover you were a jug, eh?" "Remarkable," sighed Ruggedo, as Wutz paused to blow a silver bubble which floated out of the workden, breaking somewhere outside with a tinkling bell-like explosion. "2 glasses of melted silver," snapped the wizard to a smart-looking bellboy who came in answer to this singular summons. "Now," continued Wutz, looking at the Gnome King through half-closed eyes, "before I attempt to capture the Emerald City, I must have one of 2 things. Either the silver hammer belonging to a witch of the West, or the magic belt that once belonged to you. So far, none of my agents have been able to find the witch, locate the hammer, or discover where Ozma now keeps your magic belt. But you, its rightful owner, must know exactly where it is hidden." Ruggedo, without saying anything, nodded briefly. "Well then," said Wutz, "if you will help me steal the magic belt, which I understand is the most potent and powerful magic in Ev or Oz, I will kick Kaliko off your throne, restore your own kingdom, and give you besides any one of the 4 Oz kingdoms you may fancy." "Oh, don't bother me with any of the Oz kingdoms. I'm sick of the place," frowned the gnome, wagging his beard vindictively. "All I want is my own kingdom and my own magic belt. But I tell you what I will do. I'll help you steal this belt, for I know exactly where it is hidden, show you how it works so you can transform Ozma and all her friends and counselors to rocks and rubble. But when you are safely established as Supreme Wizard of Oz, you must return the belt to me." "Oh, naturally," promised the wizard, chuckling to himself as he thought how quickly he would turn Ruggedo to a rock once he was wearing the famous belt. Taking a glass of melted silver from the tray the boy had just set down, Wutz lifted it to his lips, and Ruggedo, his eyes glittering with all their old spitefulness, raised his own glass to drink to the wicked bargain. "Come," he sputtered, wiping his mouth on the back of his hand. "When do we start?" What magic have you to carry us to the capital and open the emerald safe where the magic belt and other important treasures of Ozma are hidden? But wait, perhaps we had better look in the magic picture and see where Ozma and the Wizard of Oz are now.
I'm afraid we cannot do that, Wutz explained regretfully.
Seven spoiled the canvas in some way when he reduced it to carry it here. It doesn't show anything now, and I've not had time to repair the damage. Pshaw, that's too bad, said Ruggedo, going over to touch the picture, now hanging on the wizard's wall. But the record book's still working, I suppose?
Oh, yes, said the wizard, stepping up to the marble table
and glancing down at the open page. Listen to this. It says, roared the Silver King, holding his sides and simply rocking with wicked merriment. It says,
2 metal monarchs are plotting the downfall of the present ruler of Oz.
What else does it say? Inquired the Gnome King, who had had more experience than his companion in dealing with the magicians of the Emerald City.
It says, Ozma and her counselors have gone to the castle of Glinda the Good, Wutz told him complacently, closing and padlocking the big volume.
Then we'd better start at once before they return, declared Ruggedo, for as soon as we have my belt, we can change them to rocks wherever they are. The most important thing is to get that belt before they know we are after it. But how are we going to get to the Emerald City? And how are we going to open that safe?
My silver blowpipe will reduce the safe to a heap of ashes without injuring the contents, answered the wizard. And reaching the capital will be the simplest part of all. Taking a silver tube from a high shelf, Wutz put it in his pocket, and reaching for his bubble pipe, he began to blow an enormous quicksilver bubble round himself and the Gnome King. Slowly, and with both kings inside, the bubble rose, passed in a silver mist out of the wizard's den, up through the honeycomb of caves, caverns, and grottos, on up and up, till it floated right out of the top of the Silver King's mountain. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Handy Mandy and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 19 At the Bottom of the Mountain. At the same moment the silver bubble carrying Wutz and Ruggedo burst out of the top of the mountain, Handy Mandy and Nox reached the bottom, arriving at last at the end of the winding stair. One amethyst burned dimly on the small landing, and crowded uncomfortably together, the two prisoners found themselves facing a heavily barred door. "Private Lower of the Wizard of Wutz, keep out," announced a surly sign. But Handy and Nox, their legs still quivering from the long downward climb, were in no humor to be stopped by a sign. "Lower, sniffed Handy Mandy disgustedly. "I should think it was. We must be at the very bottom of this miserable mountain. Lower indeed. Well, I expect a lower is the opposite of a tower. Come on." Picking up the silver ball, Handy squinted sharply at the door, giving it a quick shove to see whether it was locked or fitted with an invisible moving panel. But there was nothing remarkable about this door, and nothing on it except a very small silver keyhole, which at once recalled to the Goat Girl the key she had been carrying around ever since she left Carrotaria. "Oh, Nox, I believe the key in your horn will fit," she cried excitedly, and deftly removing the left prong of Nox's headgear, she shook out the ball. Then, while Nox, fairly panting with impatience, looked on, Handy took the key from the ball and inserted it in the silver lock. When it turned easily and smoothly, she was almost afraid to open the door.
What would they find on the other side? What had the wizard done to his helpless young captive? As Handy hesitated, Nox rushed forward, banging the door open with his great shoulder. "Carry! Carry!" wailed the faithful ox, and falling to his knees, Nox began to snort and blubber in real earnest. Handy, hurrying after him into the small, stuffy cell, saw a handsome boy in hunting costume standing motionless and silent as a statue in the center of a great shimmering violet bubble. Without thinking or reasoning or even stopping to consult the ox, the Goat Girl flung out all her arms toward the solitary figure, her iron hand puncturing the bubble with a deafening pop. "Why, hello, Nox!" The little King stepped calmly out of the misty vapor, all that was left of the wizard's bubble. "Where's your other horn? And who is this jolly-looking girl?" Who, indeed? There was so much to be told and explained. Even with Handy and Nox talking as fast as they could and taking turns, it took almost an hour to tell the story of their journey from Keretaria to the Silver Mountain and their awful experiences with the Wizard of Wutz. Kerry himself remembered nothing since he had started out on the hunting expedition. He listened with angry exclamations and bounces as Nox related the tale of King Kerr's treachery and the sad state of affairs in Keretaria. "And I've been shut up in this bubble for 2 years," mourned the little King, looking round the dismal cell with a shudder. "Why, it makes my head ache just to think of it." "Mine, too," agreed Handy, clapping Nox's left horn in place. "But it's almost over now, my lad. If we can just find some way out of this mountain, I'll settle old King Kerr and his high boys, not to speak of this woozling wizard." Placing Kerry on Nox's back, Handy looked nervously at the door of the lower. At sight of the winding stair, Nox gave a great groan and shudder. "Oh, I'll never climb these steps again," he declared, planting his feet stubbornly. "Never! Where's that silver hammer, m'lass? Give it a tap and see what the dwarf can do for us. Wutz and Ruggedo are too busy with their wicked plans to bother us now." "I wouldn't be too sure of that," muttered the Goat Girl. Nevertheless, she pulled out the hammer and tapped it lightly on the floor. "Well, what's wanted?" yawned Himself, appearing instantly and in the exact spot the hammer had struck. "We want to get out of here," cried Kerry, so excited and delighted with the purple-bearded dwarf he instantly forgot all his troubles. With a crooked smile at the little King, Himself looked questioningly at Handy and at the Goat Girl's quick nod, rapped his knuckles on the north wall of the lower. At once a small panel slipped aside, revealing an elevator, its door invitingly open. Waving all her hands to thank Himself, who was already beginning to disappear, Handy stepped inside. Nox, with Kerry still perched on his back, just managed to squeeze in when the door snapped shut and the elevator sped upward carrying its 3 passengers in double quicksilver time to the work den of the wizard. Handy, a bit disappointed not to find herself on top of the mountain, stepped out first. As Nox, with an awkward jump, followed her, the door slammed shut and the elevator dropped like a plummet to the bottom of the mountain. "Oh, this must be where Wutz works all his magic transformations," breathed Kerry, sliding off Nox's back and gazing around with deep interest and curiosity. "I'll bet he blew a bubble round me right in this very den. Wonder where he is now." There was a slight cough at Kerry's question, and turning, they saw Nifflepok standing uncertainly in the doorway. "Ah, so we meet again," cried Handy, doubling up all her fists and walking grimly toward the Silver King's fat minister. "Where is that rascally master of yours? As you probably know by this time, we kept our bargain, but he still has to keep his." "Indeed, you are fortunate to have escaped with your lives," muttered Nifflepok, taking off his hat and looking anxiously inside. "I'm sorry to tell you the Wizard of Wutz never keeps his bargains. No matter how hard we work or try to please him, sooner or later we are all shelved or potted." "Then why work for such a villain?" snorted the Royal Ox gruffly. "Where is he now?" "Yes, where is he now?" asked Kerry, who, in spite of the terrible stories he had heard, hoped to get a look at the wonderful wizard who had enchanted him. "Gone," answered Nifflepok, putting on his high hat and giving it a couple of taps. "He's bubbled off with the Gnome King to conquer Oz, and I expect by this time they've bewitched about half the inhabitants of the Emerald City." "Oh, what a shame!" burst out Kerry. "Bubbled off? What do you mean by that?" The Goat Girl reached out with all her arms to pull the Silver King's little minister closer. "I mean bubbled off," repeated Nifflepok, struggling to release himself from Handy's clutches. "He blew a quick silver bubble and he and Ruggedo sailed away in it, if that's any plainer." "Oh, then we had better go right after them," snorted the Ox in an anxious voice. "Show us out of this mountain, you little pudding, or I'll toss you higher than a kite." "Oh, let's do something," begged Kerry, who, being young, was quite daring and absolutely foolhardy. "We aren't going to let those dreadful kings conquer the country, are we, and not lift a hand?" "Well, I'm sure I'd lift all 7 if it would do any good," mused Handy Mandy in a depressed voice. "But how can we stop them? Wutz and Rug have probably stolen all the magic in Ozma's palace by this time, the thieving rascals." "But surely you have some magic," ventured Nifflepok, who had finally jerked himself free. "Or you could never have disenchanted the gnome or found the wizard's lore and rescued this boy. And if you have," he warned, backing rapidly away, "if you have, you'd better use it quick. When Wutz finishes conquering Oz, he's sure to remember you and turn you to rocks and rubble." "He's going to turn everyone to rocks and rubble," wailed Nifflepok, dashing out of the workshop. "Great Gazoo, what shall we do? I don't want to be a rock," snorted Nox. "And I won't be a rock," stormed the little King. "It was bad enough being shut up in a bubble and missing 2 whole years. Oh, you won't let him turn us to rocks, will you, Handy? And do let's help poor Ozma before it's too late." Kerry looked up at her so pleadingly, Handy, against all her inclinations and better judgment, pulled out the silver hammer again. "The hammer will be better than the ball," she reasoned quickly, "for the ball only seems to help Keretarians. Now then—" Lifting the hammer in her iron hand, the Goat Girl brought it down sharply on the wizard's marble table. Silver sparks flew up in every direction, and out of the very middle of the shower stepped the yawning dwarf. "Say, I'm trying to take a nap," grumbled Himself, stretching his arms up sleepily. "What do you fellows want now?" "We want to go to the Emerald City of Oz and save Ozma from Wutz and the Gnome King," explained Handy in one breathless sentence. "My, all that?" Stifling another yawn, Himself grinned mischievously at the Goat Girl. "Then stand in line, please." So Handy placed herself in front of the Royal Ox, and Kerry stepped behind him, and the dwarf, seizing the hammer, brought it down with a terrible blow just behind the little King. And what a blow it was you can readily understand when I tell you that its force carried the 3 travelers clear out of the Silver King's mountain and all the way to the Emerald City itself. Flying along for a moment beside them, Himself slipped the hammer back in the Goat Girl's hand, and then, with another tremendous yawn, disappeared. End of chapter 19.